Introducing the chi-square test of independence. After watching this video, you will be able to list the requirements for using a chi-square test of independence, given a specific scenario, state whether it is appropriate to use a chi-square test of independence, and write a null and alternative hypotheses for a chi-square test of independence. Requirements for using chi-square test of independence. You must be comparing two categorical or qualitative variables. The sampling method must be simple random sampling, and the samples must be independent. Additionally, the sample size must be large enough such that all expected frequencies are greater than 1, and at least 80% of those expected frequencies must be greater than 5. Let's examine this first requirement, which is comparing two categorical variables. But before we do this, let's review variable types. Remember, we can split all variables into quantitative and qualitative, or categorical. Quantitative variables can be further divided into quantitative discrete and quantitative continuous. Recall that quantitative discrete variables are counts, quantitative continuous variables are measures, and qualitative or categorical variables are labels. Remember, chi-square test of independence only uses qualitative or categorical variables, so that's the only data type that we will be interested in for the purposes of this test. Introducing the chi-square test of independence. The chi-square test of independence determines whether two categorical or qualitative variables are dependent or independent. For example, is a person's opinion on tax reform related to their political affiliation? Is a person's color preference dependent on their gender? Will a person's opinion on cigarette taxes be affected by whether or not they are a smoker? Is a chi-square test of independence appropriate? To answer this question, we must first identify the two variables being discussed and determine if both variables are categorical. If both variables are categorical, the chi-square test of independence is appropriate. If one or both of the variables is not categorical, the chi-square test of independence cannot be used. Example 1. A scientist would like to know if a person's mood is related to the quantity of sugar they consume daily. As we proceed through these examples, please pause the video, write down your answer, or say it in your mind, and then unpause the video to see if you are correct. A person's mood can be considered categorical or qualitative variable. After all, you would say that you are happy, or sad, or depressed, or joyful. All of those are labels, not counts or measures. But what about the amount of sugar a person consumes? Well, that's actually a quantity. We would measure the amount of sugar a person consumes. Therefore, since this amount of sugar is not categorical, we cannot use a chi-square test of independence in this scenario. Example 2. A researcher would like to determine if wearing a bike helmet is associated with receiving a head injury in bike accidents. Again, pause this video, write down yes or no, is the chi-square test of independence appropriate, and then unpause the video to see if you are correct. Wearing a bike helmet, yes or no, is categorical or qualitative. After all, yes or no is a label. Receiving a head injury, yes or no, is also a categorical or qualitative variable. Since both variables are categorical, a chi-square test of independence is appropriate in this scenario. Let's do another example. You want to know whether gender affects a person's GPA. Again, pause this video, write down your answer, and then unpause it to see if you are correct. Well, a person's gender is categorical or qualitative. But what about a GPA? Well, that's actually quantitative, right? It's a count or a measure. Since GPA is not categorical, a chi-square test of independence is not appropriate in this scenario. Example 4. Someone decides to determine whether musical aptitude is related to a person's IQ. So what do I mean by musical aptitude? That simply means whether I am gifted musically or not. So that would be categorical or qualitative, right? If I say, oh, this person over here, he is really gifted, or she is a really gifted singer, right? That's describing them. That is a label. It's not a count or a measure. But what about an IQ? Well, that's a quantitative variable. So since IQ is not categorical, a chi-square test of independence is not appropriate in this scenario. Example 5. You want to test whether blondes have more fun, so you collect data about hair color and ask people whether or not they had fun over the weekend. Hair color is a categorical or qualitative variable. So is having fun. Since both variables are categorical, a chi-square test of independence is appropriate in this scenario. Example 6. You want to know whether the color of a vehicle affects the number of speeding tickets a person gets. Again, pause this video, write down your answer, and then unpause it to see if you are correct. The color of a vehicle is a categorical or qualitative variable. However, the number of speeding tickets is a count, meaning it is a quantitative discrete variable. Since the number of speeding tickets is not categorical, a chi-square test of independence is not appropriate in this scenario. Example 7. A person wants to know if the type of music someone listens to affects that person's mood. Well, the type of music is a categorical or qualitative variable. You might have jazz or rap or classical music. All of those are labels. Similarly, a person's mood would also be considered categorical or qualitative. Since both variables are categorical, a chi-square test of independence is appropriate in this scenario. Chi-square test of independence, a hypothesis test. The chi-square test of independence is a hypothesis test. Like other hypothesis tests, when we perform a chi-square test of independence, we identify the null and alternative hypotheses. Unlike other hypothesis tests, however, the statements in the chi-square test of independence are always the same. The null hypothesis will always be that the two categorical variables are independent, and the alternative hypothesis will always be that the two categorical variables are dependent. Make sure you contextualize your hypothesis statements. In other words, instead of saying the two categorical variables, state what those variables are in that problem. Practice writing hypothesis statements. Example 1. A researcher would like to determine if wearing a bike helmet is associated with receiving a head injury in bike accidents. Again, with these examples, I encourage you to pause this video, try writing the hypothesis statement yourself, and then unpause the video to see if you are correct. The null hypothesis in this case is that wearing a bike helmet and receiving a head injury are independent, meaning that neither one of them affects the other. Alternatively, our alternative hypothesis is that wearing a bike helmet and receiving a head injury are dependent. Notice how I contextualized both of these hypothesis statements. I did not just say the two categorical variables. I mentioned what each variable was. Example 2. You want to test whether blondes have more fun, so you collect data about hair color and ask whether people had fun over the weekend. So my null hypothesis is that hair color and fun are independent. My alternative hypothesis is that hair color and fun are dependent. Example 3. A person wants to know if the type of music someone listens to affects that person's mood. My null hypothesis is that the type of music that a person listens to and their mood are independent. My alternative hypothesis is that the type of mood and music are dependent. Example 4. You want to know if omitting sugar from your diet gives you more energy, less energy, or the same amount of energy. The null hypothesis is that sugar and energy are independent, and the alternative hypothesis is that sugar and energy are dependent. Having watched this video, you should now be able to list the requirements for using a chi-square test of independence, and given a specific scenario, state whether it is appropriate to use a chi-square test of independence. You should also be able to write the null and alternative hypotheses for a chi-square test of independence.